Well, hello and welcome to this lecture on Pompeii and Herculaneum. My name is Dr. Lori Wenzel, and I was a professor at Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for most of my career. And this particular presentation, my husband and I put it together. He is the photographer and took most of the slides. So if you have particular questions about any of that, we can help you out with them afterwards. So let's just talk a little bit about them. Some common questions that people always ask is how many people survived? And archaeologists think that 75% of both Pompeii and Herculaneum people survived the volcano by fleeing from there. So let's just talk about what you're going to see tomorrow, because this lecture is meant to help you get ready for that visit tomorrow, because the sites are so magnificent. You're just going to look around in awe, and it's going to be hard to hear the tour director while you're walking. So they are a time capsule, both of them, both of the cities are. You walk inside the gate and you virtually walk back 2,000 years in time. With each city, you're given an opportunity to see what life looked like in the first century CE. And the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were covered for 1,800 years. They laid undisturbed. Actually, people thought during the Middle Ages that they were a myth. But when you go and visit the city, you will step back in time and you will see a first century home, first century furniture, stores, restaurants, graffiti, brothels, baths, gymnasium, temples, and toilets. Okay? So let's just take a look at where they are for my folks that are super interested in geography. So this is Mount Vesuvius right here. Pompeii is 6 miles away and Herculaneum is 4 miles away. And this is where Naples is. We're actually going to land there. This is the Amalfi Coast in here. And this area right here that we have labeled, we're going to talk a little bit about Pliny the Younger and Pliny the Elder, because they witnessed the volcano erupting, and Pliny the Younger is going to write about it. He was staying at his mother's house, and he was able to see the volcano from there. So just so you're aware that when Mount Vesuvius erupted, that everything within 6 miles of the volcano was completely covered with volcanic debris, and everything within 6 miles, if there was anything alive when that volcano erupted after about 12 hours, they all died from the gas that came from there. So people had to leave in a hurry. Let's talk a little bit about life, what it looked like at the time that the volcano erupts. Well, we know this is a picture of what we think Herculaneum looked like, and Pompeii looked very much the same, these big walled-in cities. They were under the protection of Rome at that time. So they start out as Greek territories, and in 146 BC, the Romans conquered the Greeks and then took over their property. So Pompeii and Herculaneum come under Roman control. The Romans had boats that crisscrossed the Mediterranean, and they were great at trading some of the products that were in these cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. And what did they have? Well, they were known for their wine. They were known for their wool. And they were known for something called their fish sauce. And I always think of like Lowry seasoning. So they had a fish sauce, and they would let their fish out in some sort of liquid with spices until it dried. I imagine the city did not smell very good, but they were known for this incredibly good fish sauce. Now, we know that in August of 79 AD, they were beginning to have problems in both cities. And what were the problems? Strange things were happening. Their wells were running dry from the water. There were cracks in the walls. There were tremors in the city. And Pompeii had fish pods. They raised different kinds of fish, and some of those entire pods were dying out. Those fish pods were dying. It smelt like sulfur in the city or rotten eggs, but no one knew what those signs meant. The archaeologists have discovered that 1800 years before, so about 18 or 1900 BC, there was a huge volcanic eruption from Mount Vesuvius. But at this time in history, it's 79 CE, the Common Era, and no one knew what the signs were. So let's just talk about what happened. We know that the volcano erupted at 1 o'clock in the afternoon with such a force that the debris went 18 miles into the air, 40,000 tons of volcanic rock and ash every second, per second, and that will increase to 100,000 tons of ash per second 4 hours later. So the first 30 minutes, if you witnessed the eruption and you left Pompeii and Herculaneum, you were in pretty good shape because nothing was coming down. But after 30 minutes, some of the pumice stones begin to fall. Now, this is a pumice stone. They measure small, from a couple of inches to the size of a small melon. So this is rock that's been kicked up by the volcano, and as they cool, the rocks come down and they cool, any soluble gas is going to escape and it's going to create this pumice stone. Now, the problem is it hit people and injured them so they couldn't leave. It collapsed the roofs of the houses in Pompeii. It blocked the doorways for the houses in Pompeii, and people simply could not get out once the pumice stones began to fall. Now, most of the volcanic ash is going to fall over Pompeii, and some into the surrounding areas, but Herculaneum really was not affected in the first 12 hours of the volcano erupting. So, this is Pliny the Younger. He's at his mother's house, and he and his uncle are going to see the volcano explode. And they describe it as a pine tree rising, and today this kind of volcano is called the Plinian volcano or the Plinian eruption. Now, this is Pliny the Younger. This is the nephew of Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder was a navy person for the Romans, and he could hear people crying out, and he will try to land a boat by Herculaneum, but there's too many pumice stones in the water, and he can't get there, okay? So what happens is, if you take a look at this diagram, the volcano is going to erupt, and it's going to spew all of this volcanic ash and debris into the air. And for a while, this movement can sustain itself, but 12 hours later, so there's some ash falling. The ash is falling about 5 inches per hour in Pompeii, but only in Pompeii. But after 12 hours, this heavy cloud of volcanic debris is going to weigh so much, it's going to implode and come down the mountain of Mount Vesuvius and rush into Herculaneum, traveling at 100 miles an hour, 450 degrees. It came into Pompeii and it came into Herculaneum and swept over the entire city in 4 minutes. Okay, so anyone who hadn't left 12 hours after the eruption started was instantly killed by this huge amount of volcanic debris that came. Now, this we call this the pyroclastic flows. There will be 6 pyroclastic flows. So all this goes up in the air, and then it all comes down and goes down the mountain, and it will wash over Herculaneum again, and then some will come into Pompeii and wash over Pompeii. So this is what we think it looks like as it's coming down off the mountain. And then we have, so here's all the pumice stone on the bottom, and here's the pyroclastic flow flowing down. Now we know that everyone within 6 miles of the volcano who had not fled was killed by the volcano and the toxic gas. But Pliny the Elder, and this is a picture of him, he was a statesman, he was a person who was in charge of the Roman Navy, and he wrote many books on science and engineering. He was a very well-read man. He can't land at Herculaneum, so he travels 18 miles away from Mount Vesuvius. And even at that point, 18 miles away, the next morning he was overcome by the fumes, the toxic fumes of the volcano, and he collapses and dies. So even though we say that it was 6 miles, people died immediately, the lasting effect of all of the toxic gas is going to affect the surrounding area. So after the volcano stops erupting, it's going to take about 2 days. So for about 48 hours, we're going to have this volcano erupting and these pyroclastic flows that come down. After the volcano stops, it rains out. So the rain is going to mix with all of the volcanic ash. Herculaneum is going to be covered in 82 feet of volcanic ash and mud. And Pompeii is going to be covered in about 13 feet, somewhere between 8 and 13 feet, depending upon where they are. Now, once the sun comes up and it stops raining, the families who had houses in this area are going to come and try to dig out and see if they can find anything. However, the tunnels they're trying to dig keep collapsing, and they run into pockets of trapped toxic gas, and they're immediately killed by it. So within a year or so, people stop digging. They're not very successful. And we know that the land sits for 40 or 50 years, and the volcanic ash turns the soil into something very productive. So people, after about 50 years, are going to come back to the area of Pompeii and Herculaneum and start to farm and put vineyards in, and they're going to build homes. But Herculaneum and Pompeii, we have complete silence from 79 until 1594. As a matter of fact, the medieval people thought that Pompeii and Herculaneum were simply a myth. So the very first time we're going to hear about Pompeii and Herculaneum is when this man, Fontana, was digging for a well. He wanted to bring water into the city to fuel a mill for grinding, and he hit an area that had mosaics, and he thought they were simply Roman mosaics, and he wasn't really sure how to dig them out. So he actually covers them up, but people start to hear about these mosaics are maybe in this area. Is Pompeii and Herculaneum a real thing? The next person that comes up is the Prince of France, and he's a bachelor, and he wants to build this big luxury estate. Well, he decides to build it exactly over the place where the theater for Herculaneum was, and again, he's going to dig down to try to dig a well. And his men that are digging come across all of these artifacts that were in the theater area of Herculaneum. And he has a lot of friends, and he gives a lot of the treasures away to his friends to beautify their houses. Okay, so he's digging and he comes across something and he gives it away. So a lot of treasures from Herculaneum are lost in this way until Charles of Bourbon, who's from Spain, and he's going to come down and invade the area of Pompeii and Herculaneum before he's king of France. And he and his wife and his 13 children decide that they're going to build a big estate, again, a big house. And they dig down and they discover some artifacts. And his excavator does some digging, and he comes up with some artifacts, but Albuquerque is very haphazard with the way he's searching for goods. Now, Charles of Bourbon is actually going to become the king of Spain, and he is hoping for some treasures to put in the museum, but he doesn't really get what he's looking for, and it's mainly because his excavator doesn't know what he's doing. Excavations are new at this time. The good news is he has a friend whose name is Carl Weber, and Carl Weber knows a thing or two about excavating. And he actually comes to the area and he starts gently taking away layers of the earth. And he's actually going to locate the streets of Pompeii. He's going to find a sign that says the Republic of Pompeii, so he knows he's in this area. And he was able to map out the streets of Pompeii. And then what he does is he digs out the streets. And once he has the streets dug out, then he excavates the houses along the way. He actually dies in 1764 from lung disease. And he has to stop a couple of times because his diggers, the men he has working for him, they continue to run into these pockets of trapped toxic gas. And once they release that gas, everyone working in that vicinity would die. So he's having trouble getting workers, and he's also going to die of lung disease. So they continue to excavate, but things are going to move ahead in a really positive way with this particular excavator, Fiorelli, who comes to work in 1860. Now, Italy becomes a country at this time, and when they do, Pompeii is going to fall under Italy and under their protection. So Fiorelli is going to be able to save the artifacts and make sure that they are going to go to the state rather to the private owner. But he's best known for making his plaster casts, which you'll see if you go to either one of the cities tomorrow. So he noticed he does excavations a little differently. Unlike Carl Weber, who would dig down and find a street and then excavate the houses on either side, he gently took off layer by layer. So he does layer by layer for the whole city that he's excavating. And he kept coming up across these mounds that looked like human bodies. And when he broke through the mounds, he would find bones. So he knew that there were bodies there. He decided to fill those mounds with plaster Paris, and when he did that and then looked at them, out comes these human bodies, and he was able to capture the expressions and the last movements of their life. So he was able to see facial expressions. He also uncovered a man who had his arms over his wife, what he thought was over his wife. So when you go into Pompeii and Herculaneum, you can see some of these plaster casts of bodies. This is the famous one of a dog, and we think that he was eating his chain because here's his collar right here, and it looks like he's eating his chain trying to get away. And this is the Garden of Fugitives. This was actually discovered in 1961. And what happened in 1961 is that they came across these 13 bodies, men, women, and children, and they were laying on top of the pumice stone. So archaeologists think that they left Pompeii when the pumice stone stopped falling, but then were caught in the pyroclastic flow. And so we have these bodies that are left behind, these plaster. Now, Fiorelli had a job to do, and his job was to try to get people to come to Pompeii and Herculaneum because tourists bring money. So he didn't know how to make people aware of this project, but he knew he needed tourists and he needed people to help him. So he had a friend who was a writer. So the friend wrote a love story book about a young boy who comes to visit Pompeii. And he sees a cast of a 14-year-old girl, and he imagines himself going back in time and falling in love with her and saving her from the volcano, and it becomes a bestseller. So now all of these women make their husbands take them to this romantic place of Pompeii, okay? So this is what the travelers look like in 1850. Look at parasol, ladies. You got it? Big long dress, parasol, husbands, big hat on, lots of tights, okay? So that's what it looked like in 1860 when they get all these tourists in, and this is what it looks like 4 months ago, okay, with a Viking sign. That's us there, okay, 4 months ago. So the good news is that all of these people became aware of Pompeii and Herculaneum, and they want to visit. So that's going to bring revenue, and it's also going to bring in people, so that interest keeps the money flowing. So they've been able to excavate a great deal of Pompeii. 2/3 of Pompeii is excavated, 110 acres. So when you go to Pompeii, there is a lot of territory to see. Herculaneum, only 1/3 of Herculaneum is excavated, and there's a couple reasons for that. Actually, Herculaneum has more roofs on because they don't have the heavy ash that came on. They were hit by the pyroclastic flow, but not necessarily ash and pumice stone that weighed down the roofs. But the thing about Herculaneum is, remember, it's covered by 82 feet of mud, and it's almost like concrete that they have to dig through. And the second thing is, when you go to Herculaneum, you will see all of these houses on the edge. So all of these houses are on top of the ruins of Herculaneum, and they would have to buy all of this property and move them back in order to excavate some more. So they're meeting a lot of resistance. So there is 10 acres, still plenty to see, but not as much as Pompeii. So I'd like to just walk you through a couple of the things that you'll see, just so that when you hear about them tomorrow, you'll kind of have an idea of what they're talking about. First of all, the way that the cities were set up, when you live somewhere, people lived on a block. So a block was dedicated to houses. But the houses ranged in size from 10,000 square feet to 166 square feet, okay? So I want this one. I'm just going to be upfront with you guys, okay? I want the big one. I'll share some of the little ones. So the rich and the middle class lived side by side. The poor slept out on the street, okay? The rich houses, if you were rich, you had this palatial estate. You had an area outside that collected water. You had an outdoor and indoor garden. You had a place where your servants cooked, and your whole city, your whole area was walled in. Your 10,000, and so we found houses in Pompeii that were 20,000 square feet. However, if you live in this little house right here, this is the smallest one on the block. This is 13 by 13. This was your room, okay? So you only had one room, and your family lived in that one room. Notice there's no stove, no toilet, no bathtub. You probably just kept your things in that house, and you were so happy that you weren't sleeping on the street. So on any given block, there would be big houses and very tiny houses and maybe some middle-sized houses. So we're going to walk you through the Menandro house, and it's named that way because Menander was a Greek playwright. Think of somebody who would win the Tony Award. And he wrote 108 plays, and his painting is inside of this very palatial, beautiful house. So we call it the Menander house. And they had inside of this house an indoor garden area. This is called a peristyle. A peristyle was a traditional way of Roman building for the wealthy. It has these columns right here, and the columns would support a roof because it's so hot in the summertime. If you're out in the garden, you need to have a little roof over your head. But when it's cool out, you might want to be in the garden. So this is a peristyle. This is a typical kind of garden area that they had in the wealthy homes in Rome at that time. Now, when you're inside of the homes tomorrow, you'll notice three major colors. They painted in reds and yellows and blues. Those were the colors that were easily accessible to them. And they painted all of their walls, okay? Their walls are painted with either pictures of the Greek gods or some great playwright, but they are painted with several different images. And the wealthy houses have these cisterns where they collect water because at this time, the only water you can get is from the 7 local fountains that they have. So when Rome takes over Pompeii and Herculaneum, they bring water in through aqueducts because underneath the city, the rock is so hard they can't dig down and get water. So they have to have aqueducts bring in water. Water is so important that when it rained out, the rich people would have these, look at my thing just went. No, we don't want the red dot. Oh, there we are. Okay. So they would catch the water, and under here is a big cistern, and that would collect water so that the wealthy did not have to go to the public fountains if they had enough water. And of course, this is drawings, so you'll see drawings on the wall. These are frescoes. Frescoes means fresh. What does that mean? When frescoes were painted, when you painted on plaster, you had to paint while the plaster was fresh and wet because otherwise it didn't hold the color. So frescoes means painting on fresh plaster. And they have these larariums, and that is shrines to people who have died. So if you were wealthy enough and someone in your family died, you would have these little statues of the dead to remember and help your children remember those who had gone before. So you're going to see those sitting out in some of the homes of the wealthy. And this is actually one of the stories that you're going to see on one of the walls. And this is the story of Actaeon and Diana. And Diana was the Roman god of the hunt. She's known as Artemis in the Greek world, but in the Roman world, she's Diana. And this is her right here. And she was taking a bath, and this poor Actaeon, he saw her. He's a man, and she's so mad at him, she changes him into a deer, and his hounds eat him. Okay? So when you see that tomorrow, you will see that if you're going into Pompeii, and that's the story behind it. You might also see this is a mosaic that they've recently uncovered. This is the mosaic of Orion, and so when you see Orion's belt in the constellation, it's one of those few constellations you can see from almost everywhere in the world. And the story of Orion, and this mosaic is on the floor, is that he was the son of Poseidon, and he was angry that he had to live in the ocean. And so he would sneak up on land and kill anything he encountered, whether that be a person or an animal. His grandmother, whose name was Gaia, was mad at him for killing the earth creatures. And so she sent a scorpion after him. Nice grandmother that she was. And the scorpion bit her grandson and killed him. And she felt so bad about it, she put a picture of him in the heavens so that she would be reminded of her grandson, who she now missed. And the scorpion is not far, and that reminds her of what happened to her grandson. Not the best grandparenting. Don't advise that, okay? If you're going to Herculaneum, Herculaneum is named after Hercules. And Hercules, of course, his father is Zeus, and his mother is human, so he's a demigod. He killed his wife and his children, and in order to atone for that act, he had 12 battles that he had to go through. He's successful. He has to get the three-headed dog from Hades, and he has to kill a lion. He has to kill a serpent who has many heads. So he has a temple in Herculaneum. But what I love about the temple is all the paintings that are left behind. They're pretty spectacular. And this is Hercules right here. And he is on his way to visit the top of Mount Olympus with Zeus's wife Hera and with Artemis. No, that's Athena. Sorry, that's Athena right there. So he's passed his 12 tasks that he had to do to get atonement, and he's going to go up to heaven. And this is him right here, and he's fighting one of the battles with the god of the river. So it's beautiful paintings inside of this in Herculaneum. And beware of the dog. If you have a watchdog, you can be thankful to the Romans, because the Romans are the people that trained watchdogs. And they did that because they didn't have a way to keep things safe. So most people, when they had a house, they also had a dog to protect their property. And so very frequently when you're walking out in both Pompeii and Herculaneum, you'll see mosaics on the floor that literally say, beware of the dog, okay? Now, this is what if you were the middle class, this is where you lived. This is actually 2 houses right here, 1 room and 1 room. And this is a little bigger room, okay? This is a little bigger room. So that's where you lived. Now, It doesn't have anything in it. So everything that happened outside of this one room. You probably just kept your possessions in that. So say, for example, there's human waste. What do you do with it? Well, you throw it out in the street. Okay, so when you go, you're going to see the street. And I just want to point out a couple of things when you see the street. When you see the street, they're going to have these tracks in it, and that is from the wheels of the chariot. So if you lived in any part of the Roman Empire, which Herculaneum and Pompeii are in the Roman Empire, there was a standardized width between the two wheels of any chariot, and they built the roads to accommodate Roman chariots, and they built them so there's grooves in the street for the wheels. So when you're in Pompeii or Herculaneum, look for those because you're going to see those wheel marks. I kept calling it tires on the last one, and last time I did the lecture, my husband kept saying, but they didn't have any tires yet. So they're wheels. Now, what are these? Steps. Well, remember I told you that if you lived in a one-room place, you didn't have any place to go with your waste. So any food or any human waste, you just threw it out in the street. And then when it rained out, it would wash all of that into the water. Well, sometimes it didn't rain for a while, and the streets would fill up with human waste and other things. These stepping stones would allow you to walk over all of that so you didn't get your feet dirty. Okay, pretty smart. So look at how high they are. So that meant you had a lot of waste in the street. I would imagine it didn't smell very good in the summer. Okay? And our toilets. So I think there's 20 or so different toilets. The Romans were great about toilets, building toilets. They say that if you were wealthy, you would have your servant come and warm up your spot before you had to sit there. Okay. Oh, yeah, thinking of everything. And there's 20 or so in the largest toilet area. You had to pay to use them. However, you did have toilet paper. It's right here. It's a common brush, and they had it sitting in water. So I'm just going to tell you I want to go first, okay? So that's your toilet. We've come a long way. Okay, and this is the Abbondanza Street. Now remember, people are living in most people, I would say 80% of the people are living in one room. So everything that happens has to happen outside of that room. You use a toilet outside of that room. You want to eat, you have to go buy your food because you don't have a kitchen. So 80% of Pompeii and Herculaneum, they have to go out in the street of Abbondanza, and it's all restaurants and bakeries. So this is what we think it looked like. That's a nice picture. It's probably way dirtier. Now, Pompeii was known for its bread, and this is why. At this time, they're great on growing wine, producing wine, but they learned that if they put grapes in with their wheat, and let it sit, it would ferment, and it would it was like a yeast. And so they were able to have bread that was 4 or 5 inches high. This is unusual for this time period, and there's 80 bakeries in Pompeii, and they will sell their bread all over because instead of being flat and hard, it is bread that rises, okay? So this is what one of the bread areas look like. This is one of the bread ovens. You'll be able to see those in either city. This is a grinder, and this is what it looked like when they ground it. So they would put their wheat or barley in there, and then they would grind it down and usually have an animal and a servant or 2 servants doing it. And they actually had a baker that left 81 loaves of bread in the oven, and they carbonized in the pyroclastic flow, and this is what they have left. And this is what they still make today in Pompeii. Okay, this is what the bread looks like today. They also, you're going to see signs, and these were, again, down Abadanza Lane, and they're telling you about what kind of food. These are frescoes, and they're telling you what kind of food there is. Now, we'd like to think this is pizza, but remember, tomatoes aren't introduced until Christopher Columbus goes over to, the Americas, so we have 1,500 years before we get tomatoes, but it's kind of pizza without tomato sauce, okay? So they're telling you what they have. One of the favorite things they like to eat back then, besides figs and nuts, they like to eat mice baked with some honey and sesame on top. Okay? And this is simply telling you that they have waiter service. Okay, so if you want to be waited on. Now, when you went to buy your food, you bought it from one of these food vendors right here, and you're going to see those tomorrow. So they have these large areas where they could keep all of their pots, and they had many different kinds of food in those pots and wine. They liked their wine to be warm. And we think that this is what happened, that they had these large areas where they made all of the food, and then they would bring it to these local kitchens. Most of the people working here are slaves, and this is what that area looks like today. You can see the big areas that were used for cooking, and you can also see where the oven was. So there's a big oven back here, and these big areas where they cooked big pots of food. Public water. Rome brought in 7 different fountains into Pompeii and 4 into Herculaneum, and you will see them when you go. And that was the major source of water, so everyone had to go and get their water. And this is just what we think probably the young people looked like back then, spraying the water. Some boy flirting with some girl. Winemaking. Pompeii was known for its delicious wine, and these bottles will tell you what kind of wine you want. Do you want the cheapest wine, a little bit more expensive, a little bit better, or their very best wine? So that's going to tell you what kind of wine. They liked their wine at a certain temperature, and so most of the places where they kept their wine are these large containers right here, but they're halfway buried in the ground because they liked their wine warm, okay? And so it kept it at that warm temperature. This is a winemaker's house. And why do we know it's a winemaker's house? Well, we know it's a winemaker's house, we think, because they have Bacchus there, who's the god of wine. Okay, but what's interesting about this fresco that's on the wall is this is Mount Vesuvius, but after Mount Vesuvius exploded and erupted in 79, it blew off the top portion of it. So this top part is no longer there anymore. But why else do we think it's a winemaker's house? Because he had enough vases for 100,000 liters of wine. And you know what they call the man of that house? A very happy man. Okay? So, that's his house. Now, let's talk a little bit about baths. There's 4 major baths in Pompeii. The people in Pompeii and Herculaneum took a bath every single day. They're one of the few people in the world without, the Romans are, few people in the world that don't have lice. And these areas are like a third of the size of an American football field. They could hold 1,000 or 1,500 people or even more than that. They're all set up in the same way. They have a gymnasium right here. This is where men and boys would work out, learn hand-to-hand combat. And then the men had their own area. They have a cold pool, a hot pool, and a temperate pool. And the women have a cold pool and a warm pool. The women have their own changing area. Usually in the bathhouse, they also had libraries. So people could go to the library and they could bathe. And this is the area that you'll see if you go into Pompeii, and this is the exercise area. This is where the men would exercise, and when they were done exercising, they would come in and put their clothes in the cubbies. I love these cubbies. Okay. And then they would go to the hot bath. Now, this is where they would push warm air underneath the pool of water. So underneath here, you would get your warm air and it would heat up the water above. And then if it got too hot, there was always a cool pool right here that you could wash your face in if the water got too hot. And this is just a general, temporary, a mild bath where you would sit around the edges and take a bath. They have many brothels in Pompeii. Why? Because Pompeii was where the sailors stopped and they would gather material. So it was a big port, so they have a lot of sailors coming in. And how do you find a brothel? Well, I want you to see, you look at the ground, but I want you to see the Viking sign is there. So it wasn't like I was looking at the ground to find this. I needed a Viking sign to find it, okay? I didn't do that on my own. This was the other one on a wall. So it directed the sailors to a brothel house. We have found 27 brothel houses in Pompeii alone. Now, they had pictures on the brothels to show what kind of position you might want. I knew I wanted a picture for this lecture, but I thought that would be creepy. So my husband said, what if I take a picture of somebody taking a picture, because that will be less creepy. So that's what you see. This is the less creepy version. Feel free. But if you want to, everybody does take pictures, but it's less creepy to take a picture of somebody else taking a picture. Less creepy version. Okay, and this is what the beds look like. So those beds in the brothels look like this. And then they call them lupanare because lupanare was the Roman slang for a brothel or a prostitute. One of the last things you'll visit if you're in Pompeii on your tour is this forum right here area. The forum is the big outside area that has the market area. We're going to just take a look at this. This is what we think it looked like. This is what it looks like today. And what I've said to people is take a walk around. They're going to give you 15 minutes to walk around and go around, because this is the front of the Apollo's temple and this is the back of it. So walk around, spread out, and take a look at the forum. This is an area that had a marketplace and a temple. This is another temple to Jupiter right here. This is a basilica. A basilica was a government building, and if you think that if you go to a church and it's called a basilica, they copied the Roman basilica. These basilicas began in 500 BC. They were buildings for the senators and for the judges. There was a big platform in the front, a center aisle, and then seating on both sides. And the Christian churches liked it so well, they just took over the name of basilica. And this is what we think the market looked like, and this is what it looks like today. This is some of the fish sauce. Remember I told you they had Lari seasoning? Well, this is what it looked like when it was sitting out, waiting to dry. And then we're just going to close by talking about the amphitheaters. They have an amphitheater there. It was built in 70 BC, one of the first stone amphitheaters, and they still use it today. Bonnie Raitt and James Taylor played there. I think there's a few more people that have played concerts there. They have a large theater that you get to walk through, and this was used for the plays that they had. And they had a small theater that was used for perhaps weddings or for music that was being played. We're going to close by just talking about the boathouses. These are in Herculaneum, and in 1981, they found these 12 boathouses, and they had 391 skeletons in them. These are replicas, not the real thing, but what they think happened was these are right down where the water once was in Herculaneum before all the volcanic ash covered it. They think people came down into these boathouses trying to get into the water, hoping somebody would rescue them, and when the pyroclastic flow came, it covered these houses, and these people baked to death. They were baked in these houses. Okay, just a little bit about the date. So the traditional date is in August, but archaeologists think actually it's probably October for 3 reasons. People were dressed too warm. They wouldn't have been dressed that way with that many clothes on. the food on the table was from a summer harvest and that those things hadn't been harvested yet. And there was a writing on a wall in Pompeii at a restaurant that said, "I ate too much on October 10th," and that wouldn't have happened if the city was covered. So this is what Pompeii looked like before, and this is what it looks like today. And this is what Herculaneum looked like before, and this is what it looks like today. So I hope that this has given you a little bit of a chance to see what a stunning location this is. And really, when you walk into Pompeii and Herculaneum, you are walking back 2,000 years in time, and I hope that you enjoy these magnificent sights that you'll see tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time.